I get to wander around in here because this is the council chambers, but not tonight. It's a different kind of chambers. It's a fun presentation and opportunity, a real excitement. I feel like a talk show a little bit out here. So what do you think about? But my name is Ted Boyd, and I'm the Director of Economic Development with the Town of Cary, and we're very happy and excited to have you here tonight. It really means a lot to me when the community comes out in support of fun and exciting projects, another exciting project that's happening in our downtown. We have some very important guests with us here tonight, and excited, and that's our town council, and I would just like to introduce and recognize them, beginning with Mayor Harold Weinbrecht. And at-large Representative Ed Yerha. And District C Representative Jack Smith. And District D Representative Ken George. District A Representative Jennifer Robinson. And I know that Mayor Pro Tem Lori Bush is on her way. She will be here. But I also wanted to introduce District B Representative Don France. And while this project is an exciting project and all of the council cheers for it, I would have to say one of the chief cheerleaders is Don France, and we've asked him to just kind of welcome you and share a few remarks.
Thanks, Dad. Appreciate it. How y'all doing tonight? Good. Is this an exciting time to be in downtown Cary or what? Awesome. It seems like forever and a day ago we were just talking about a park in downtown, and here we are. Now we're talking about or closing in on the home stretch of phase 2 of the downtown park. So yeah, it's very exciting. How many of you were at the community workshop we had a few months ago? Show of hands. Wow. How many of you completed the online survey? How many of you did both? Awesome. That is so cool. And that is exactly what makes Cary great. Our involved citizenry who give for their time and volunteer for our community, because volunteering is so important. It's actually the ultimate exercise in democracy, if you think about it. You only get to vote in elections, once every 2-4 years? But when you volunteer in your community, you cast a vote every day about the type of community that you want to live in. So that's very important. It's one of the things that makes Cary one of the greatest places in America to live and work. And we're just so thankful for all of you that have given of your time and have volunteered to help make this happen. Much of what you're going to see tonight is based on the feedback and the input that we have received from you. And the design team has worked very hard to take all of your feedback and your input and your vision and weave it into the park plans, because at the end of the day, this is your park. This is the downtown Cary Park. This is the Cary Community Park designed by Cary citizens for Cary citizens. So we want to make sure that that happens, and that is so important to us, that this park is a reflection on your vision, your values, and what you want to see going forward in downtown. So I would like to thank the design team, the offices of James Burnett. Really want to thank our town staff. They've worked very hard on this as well. I want to thank my council colleagues for your shared vision for downtown. You guys are amazing. Nothing gets done in this town with one council member. It takes everybody working together as a team. And I think that's one thing that this council does very well. So thank you all again so much for your involvement in this process. And I hope that you really like what you see tonight. It's very exciting stuff. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be opportunity for comments and even more feedback. I don't think I have to tell anybody to not be shy. So please let us know what you think, and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all so much. And I'm going to turn it over to our Parks and Rec Director, Mr. Doug McCraney.
Thanks, Don. All right, so many of you raised your hands and that you were here before, and we appreciate that. And I can say, just from working with our consultants who have worked all across the country, that they have never, this is probably the most input, the most excitement that they've ever experienced on a project. And so you guys should be pretty proud of that. So about 4 months ago, we met in July. And in that time, the consultants have worked pretty hard. In the meeting in July, when we all met, we basically asked you, what did you want in the park? And as Don said a few minutes ago, we're hoping you'll be excited to see that we listened to you. Tonight's about basically the things that you asked for. What we're looking for is where they should be located within the park. And the consultants will talk about that more. And there's boards up there. We need about 50 minutes to do a presentation. This particular meeting is where the rubber hits the road. It's a little bit of work. And so we're going to need your help tonight. Listen to the consultants, and then there'll be an hour after that to talk to all of us, talk to the consultants, and you can help us decide where certain elements of the park, the facilities should be located. So without further ado, I want to introduce Cody Klein of the Office of James Burnett, and we'll get this thing started.
Thank you very much. Yeah, all right, perfect. So we're happy to be here as well. I think you guys will see much more of us, and we'll get to know each other very well. But I think everybody said, Doug and Don mentioned the amount of engagement and feedback that we're getting from you guys is fantastic. It's only going to make this a much better space. So tonight really is about a conversation, and our goal is to really continue the conversation. This is a stepping stone and another milestone toward making something great together. So this is really a testament to your involvement as a big piece of the process. So one of the things that we always want to kind of start with is what we're calling kind of the vision statement for the park. We're putting this into 3 main points. And again, this is a living, breathing thing. We still want your input on this. We're landscape architects and designers. We're not necessarily wordsmiths. But this is a really important part because we think that this is kind of the backbone of what makes this park yours. So there's 3 main points that I'm going to touch on. First is downtown Cary, we collectively want it to be an iconic public space for all Cary citizens. So this ultimately is about you. This is your park. We want it to be something that you're invested in, that you're proud of, that is a reflection of you as a group of citizens. We also want it to be a catalyst for future downtown development. So in a lot of places that we work, we see downtown parks really be the kind of jumping off point for development. So we think that this is a really, really important piece of the continued growth of downtown. And lastly, we think this is going to become a regional destination. With all of the things that we've been talking about together, we think that this is really going to be more than just a park that is attractive for you as Cary citizens. So all of that together kind of creates this vision statement. Again, it's a work in progress. We want feedback on everything, so this is part of why we're here today. But we think this is a pretty good representation of what we're all trying to do together. So where we are in the process, why are we all here tonight? The first community workshop that we had in July was a raging success. We talked individually to many of you. We heard a lot of great things. We're always surprised by the feedback that we hear. We tend to anticipate things, but we can generally throw that out at the very beginning because you guys always surprise us. So we had great feedback, great engagement on the first workshop. That was really intended to introduce you to the ideas that are going to become the basis of the success of the park, which is programming. So we're going to talk a lot about programming. Today is really about taking that feedback, and what we've done over the last 3 months is really take that feedback back to our studio and put it into, it's kind of an organizational study. So basically we're going to show you some ideas and options about organization, about where these different things can happen in the park. So that's today. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to kind of set the stage for what's going to happen at the end, which we think is the most important part of tonight, is really having a conversation. And then the next time that we're together, we're going to do the kind of grand unveiling of the master plan concept.
All right, so hey everybody, my name is Caroline. I'm with OJB Landscape Architecture. So Cody and Don have mentioned a lot about all of the public feedback that we've been getting from you all. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the 4 or 5 touch points that we've had with you all, at a high level, explain what the big takeaways from all of the public input has been up to this point. Oh, thank you. So I know many of you attended Public Workshop number 1. As Cody and Don were mentioning, it was a raging success. Thank you so much for coming out. Over 300 people showed up. That was really amazing for us. We're excited about this project, and we can tell that you guys are too. So the first exercise that we did at the at the public workshop was the dot voting. You guys probably remember we had a bunch of boards set up with all these different program ideas that we presented to you guys, and you guys took your dots and you voted for things that you thought would be really cool and interesting in this downtown park. And so all of those different boards sort of break down into these different categories, and as we analyzed all of the information that we got from you all, back in our studio, we started to find things that sort of rise to the top, things that you all thought would be really, really fun in this park. And sort of at a high level, 4 big takeaways from that dot voting exercise would be shade and green, so things that make a park comfortable, things that make it work. Interactive water was huge. And then lastly, food opportunities, so food and beverage opportunities within the park.
6,000 dots and four takeaways.
It was a lot of information. Next, I'll talk about the discussion groups. So you guys probably remember we broke up into roundtables. We asked you pointed questions. We were taking notes. And we took all of those notes back to our studio and sort of distilled it into these big takeaways. We start to see that you all want pop-up market opportunities, so spaces to have different craft, food, markets. Things like nature, walkability, restroom facilities, sort of the nuts and bolts of what make a good park. And then evening activation and food and beverage opportunities sort of go hand in hand. So the food and beverage opportunities can happen throughout the day with lunch, snacks, coffees, things like that. But then even a destination dining experience to happen in the evening can really help to activate the evening hours in downtown Cary. You might remember the program survey that we all filled out at the public workshop, and we rated on a scale from 1 to 5 a bunch of different program ideas. More than 140 respondents at the public workshop alone. And some big takeaways from that exercise. Again, we see pop-up market opportunities, food and beverage, interactive water. And then we start to see that you all think that art is important and that art should be represented in the downtown Cary Park. And then also unique lounge opportunities and Wi-Fi, so amenities that should be there. In the online survey, I know many of you participated in that, over 1,200 people. It was really amazing response. We start to see some different responses from that particular avenue. So a space to bring people together, ample parking, shaded dining space, walking paths, and flexible event space. Again, sort of the nuts and bolts of a good park. And then finally, I'll mention the signature winter activities. We actually saw from the online survey that very few people go outside in the winter months. I think it was 3%. So we took that as more of an opportunity that perhaps the downtown park could sort of present that opportunity in the colder months of the year to get people outside. So Doug was able to go over to the Cary Teen Council and present all of the park information, which was really great. And they had the opportunity to do the program survey that you all got to do at the public workshop. And we start to see some new and different responses from this particular demographic, things like non-traditional fitness, uncommon games, so if you think about scavenger hunts or treasure hunts that could happen in the park. Wi-Fi was very important, unique lounge opportunities, food and beverage again, and then lastly, that versatile games court, something that could function for different things throughout the day. The last thing I'll talk about is the mapping exercise, so you all probably remember. In those roundtable discussions, we broke out site plans, and we moved around different program chips on the site itself. And so we came away with 10 different maps that we took back to our studio. We started overlaying those maps and seeing where those program chips started to correlate. And you can see here, one of the strongest correlations was the location for the flexible lawn in the stormwater feature. As designers, we think this correlation makes a lot of sense. The flexible lawn is centrally located within the park, and the stormwater feature happens in the low point of the park, so it makes a lot of sense to us. With the garden and meadow chips that we moved around the site plan, we sort of see those happening across the entirety of the site. So what that tells us is this is a downtown park. It's going to be an urban space, but it's going to be interjected with these beautiful green, lush moments. And the last thing I'll mention with the mapping exercise is that you can see here in this slide that the food and beverage in the children's garden sort of happen towards Academy Street. We think Academy Street is already a great street. It has a fantastic connection up to Chatham. There's a lot of activity that already happens on that street. So food and beverage and children make a lot of sense over on that side of the park. We also see that in all of the mapping exercises, the dog park sort of happens in the north and eastern portion of the site. So all things to keep in mind. And we'll come back to this later in the presentation when Cody's talking about the different master plan alternatives. You'll see how these maps directly sort of inform what we've done with that feedback.
Yeah, and I think there's also, it's important to note that this is really what we're here to talk about today. So these relationships that we're talking about between dogs and kids and food and beverage and activities and lawn, all of those spatial relationships like these heat maps that we created from your direct feedback, that's what we're talking about this later in the conversation today. So we're going to kind of keep those things in the back of our head as we go and we talk a little bit further about some of the organizational ideas.
Absolutely. Before we get into that organization, we wanted to kind of set the tone with talking about some of these spaces. And from your feedback and the pieces of the park that we're going to include, and also think about what they aren't as well as what they are. So if we set the tone and we think about a typical park, say an expanse of lawn that you might see in a neighborhood park, that's not necessarily what we're talking about in the downtown park. And I think that was kind of directed in the feedback that we received from you during the public process. We're talking about a highly programmed and flexible space, something that can be activated with yoga like you see here, or even be host to Cary's largest and most special events, something that the Phase 1 portion of the park currently does as well. But with the expanded area and park size, we think that that program in downtown could even be expanded. When we're talking about kids play in general, people might think of swings and slides. That's not necessarily what we're talking about in the downtown park, and definitely the feedback that we received during the public process spoke about something that was more imaginative, something that was more adventurous as a children's garden.
And not something that's going to burn you on a hot day in the sun.
And something for kids of all backgrounds and different abilities. And certainly not just kids, but for those at the young at heart too. This is a fun sand volleyball area, but we also have play ideas that could pop up for the athlete, or even for friends, the socialite of the group, places to congregate and enjoy. And even thinking about spaces for the adventure seeker, no matter your age. And a lot of this is in response to thinking about the different opportunities that you had identified through the public process and through some of the survey review. Not a park that closes down at dusk. It's certainly going to be something that's activated into the evening hours at downtown Cary. And stormwater, Caroline had mentioned this through the mapping exercise, that there was a pretty clear definition of where that might want to be on the park site, but we want it to be something more than just a conventional stormwater pond. We think it could be an integrated park feature and something that serves the surrounding areas and even potentially mitigates downstream issues. And when we think about water features, we want to think beyond just something that we look at. We want to think about something that we touch and interact with. We run through and splash. And so this was definitely something, as Caroline mentioned, that was responded well to during the survey, something that can be touched and interacted with. A lot of people's perception of a dog park might be a fenced-in grassy area, but that's not necessarily what we're thinking about when we talk about dog play in the downtown park. We think it could be something that's exciting, something that could be exploratory for social interaction, but here's the key, not just for dogs, but also for people. And we think that dog owners, friends alike, could use a dog play place like this in the downtown park. When we think about urban plazas, something that could be flexible, but not necessarily like this, we think about the flexibility, the opportunities to interject program in these flexible plazas, something that can be comfortable with movable seating, with shade. Also something, as Caroline had mentioned, that tested very positively in the public process, a home for pop-up markets. Even food trucks along Academy, and special areas like the connection to the library and a plaza that could host events like reading and story time. The architectural elements, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail lately, they don't want to be drag and drop features. They want to be one-of-a-kind buildings, something that's really iconic for the downtown park, and the pieces of architecture are going to be well integrated into the landscape and into the park spaces. And even the structures are going to be multifaceted. They're going to be flexible, not just a structure that's serving one purpose and stands empty 6 days a week. We think that these can be inspired, multi-purposed architectural elements and host all sorts of gatherings like the market here that you see under the canopy, something that can function simply from the day to day, either as a shade structure or as an architectural piece in the landscape, and even into the night when we have larger activities. When we think about park furnishings, not just the bench that's every 50 feet along the pathway, but interesting spaces that we can gather and lounge, like this urban beach concept.
We're going to get that question. What's an
Yeah, kind of a flexible, interesting area and something that could connect well to the park feature. And the unique lounging definitely was popular with the teens through the survey process. But even the furniture itself could be artistic pieces too, like these swings that we see in this park feature. And of course, landscape is such an important part of the park. But when we think about a 21st century landscape and a 21st century urban park, we think that it needs to celebrate the local flora and the plant communities. And we can have varieties of garden experiences throughout the park, and we can talk about that a little bit more as something that could be cultivated, even tasted, and even celebrated in, like in this celebration garden that you see. And we spoke a little bit about art with the swinging chairs, but we want it to be different and something that's maybe not the norm of the art culture that we see typically, something that can stretch the imagination and the boundaries of public art here in Cary. So to kind of wrap up this, not this, but that segment, we think that passive and relaxing parks have their place, but downtown Cary will be an active gathering place, and it's going to have something for everyone. But the best part, it's in the heart of downtown Cary. But we think that these spaces are incredibly important. But the most important part of that is how we activate them and how we get people to come every day or every week. And Ben's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Simon. So how do we activate these spaces? Well, we asked you, you told us. We asked you about, I think, over 225 specific ideas. We have about 1,500 responses, including some of you guys who ended up voting twice because you came in person and also did the online survey. We won't hold that against you. But that's a lot of data to work with. And of those, say, 230 or so specific program ideas, you guys responded very positively to a little about half of them, maybe a little more than half. And we've managed to work, we think, all of those ideas into the conceptual plans that you guys are going to see in a few moments here. So I'm going to give you a little bit of color on what we heard, give you a little bit of a sampling of some of the very specific and more unusual ideas that get positive receptions. But we don't really have time to go into 117 different ideas. But what we heard from you also is that you don't want downtown Cary Park to only be active in the summertime, right? That the fall and the spring are beautiful times here in Cary, and that we should be activating and programming the park as close to year-round as we can get. Caroline mentioned earlier that we also think there is some opportunity based on the response that we heard. Hey, we don't really go outside in the winter, but we are enthusiastic about these specific wintertime activities. So this graphic that you guys see up here, this represents a real very, very early hypothetical programming calendar for downtown Cary Park. So this is real right here at this stage. It's going to change a lot between now and opening day. But we see about 40% of that programming happening this summer and half of it really happening in those shoulder seasons. In terms of the type of programming that you all said you wanted to have in downtown Cary Park, well, we heard a lot of enthusiastic responses about things that are already happening in Phase 1 and already happening in a few other spaces around town. So those are all in there. Things like movies and concerts and games, all scored really, really highly, and we want to actually build on those. We want to do new things with outdoor entertainment. We want to introduce new games that a lot of you actually gave us specific ideas. So we didn't just ask you for feedback on those 230 or so ideas. We also asked for your original ideas, and we got some of those, and we've incorporated those into the plan. Things, fitness classes, everybody knows fitness classes in parks and rec facilities. Everybody thinks about live entertainment. People are very enthusiastic about food and beverage, but I want to draw your attention to that really big golden chunk of that pie there. That's about 35 or 40% of all the activities that you guys expressed enthusiasm about. What we are calling specialty programming. These are smaller scale, more intimate. In general, there are some exceptions where programming might be a little bit larger in scale, but mostly small scale, intimate programs that might not appeal to everybody. It's not a broad base event like a cultural festival or outdoor movie. These are things like knitting clubs. These are foreign language clubs. These are gardening clubs. These are about 60 or 70 different types of small-scale programs that you all said you were interested in doing. And we think that's really also what's going to help set downtown Cary Park apart from other parks in Cary and elsewhere in central North Carolina. So we talked about these four core elements that you guys will see in all three of the plans. This flexible plaza along Academy that's got a restaurant in it. Now, we have located about 20 or so specific programs in that plaza right now. Not to say they're all happening all at the same time. They are not. This is going to be a dynamic space. All these spaces, they're going to change depending on what time of day, what day of the week, and what season of the year you're in them. So you might come here into the plaza for a holiday market in December, but you might learn how to make your own pizza in June, or maybe a little hot in June. Maybe we should move that to April. I don't know. But the idea here is that all these spaces, where it's the flexible plaza, the Great Lawn, which it's a great audience location for big performances, but it's also a place where we can do fun sports leagues that are a little bit more casual and informal. It's a place that we can have kite flying. It's a place where we can bring lots and lots of snow in the wintertime and do some type of big signature winter festival in downtown Cary. Similarly, the pavilion, you see, we don't call it a performance pavilion, we just call it a pavilion. Yes, it's for performances, but it's also for all sorts of other things. You can see in the faded background here a drum circle at the park that we all did together in Houston that takes place on the stage, on the performance pavilion. Other programs that might be more appropriate to have under shade, as well as a gathering place for caroling in the wintertime. Maybe if we put it on the stormwater feature, it also becomes a venue for environmental education. So, we don't expect you to be able to read this. But this is everything that you guys gave us in a positive responses for. We analyzed every single result. We look at the mean, we look at the median, we look at the standard deviation to come up with what we think is going to work. Look, if we got all this stuff on opening day, this would be the most activated, most highly programmed park in the United States, which is certainly our aspiration, though it's a lofty goal for day one. But certainly if we got half of these things, I think we would all say this has been a tremendous success, and I think if we got half of these things in the park, which I think we'll be able to do, I think everybody will have something that they love to do in downtown Cary Park. Now the question is, Jeffrey, where are they going to do them?
All right, great.
And I think further to that, as we talk, when we're almost done here, I promise that we're going to go and actually have some discussion. But when we're talking about these different pieces of program and where they're happening and how we activate them and what you do in them from different times of the day, that's the conversation that we want to have. So as we're thinking about where you're playing badminton versus where you're having a sandwich versus where you're taking your kid to play, those are the kind of things that, ask us. We want to have a conversation about it, and then we want to talk about where those things go in the park. So,
Great. Hi, everybody. My name's Jeffrey. I'm an architect. I get to talk about buildings. I get to design buildings. It's what I love to do. I'm really happy to be here to talk a little bit about what makes buildings in a park unique. There's a lot of park spaces. There's a lot of play spaces. Simon has brought up a lot of those. But the park also has facilities and structures and buildings that add certain kind of qualities and characteristics and spaces for a lot of these programs to take place. We put images of architecture on boards in the first workshop, and we didn't explicitly ask you to ask which kind of architecture you like better. Do you like a blue building or a red building better? But we went back and sort of looked at the spectrum of the dots and the boards and saw that there were kind of three qualities of architecture that you responded to, you picked up on, about the kinds of opportunities that buildings have when they're in a park setting as opposed to in a regular city setting or in another kind of context. And one is just about this possibility that the architecture, the shapes, the forms, the spaces of it can be really well integrated into the forms and shapes of the landscape. So you can have buildings rolling on hills with pavilions that can be accessed by the public and sort of open areas for people to pass through and find shade in. There's also really kind of incredible opportunities to extend the space of interior or the space of buildings out into the park with these big projecting canopies and cantilevers that make that boundary between what's a building and what's a park a little bit more blurred, so that the buildings really feel like they're part of the experience of the park and not objects that you walk up to and leave the park. We think that there's a real interesting opportunity to use a kind of material strategy in the park that picks up on sort of the incredible large trees that are in the park now and thinks about a material that can give unity to a lot of different structures. Maybe it's, in this case, a kind of a high-tech use of wood to produce shading, or high-tech fabrication techniques to produce some really interesting shaped buildings and pavilions that are unusual and add to the iconic character of the park. We also heard this sort of, which has been elaborated on a little bit already by Simon and Ben, this idea that the buildings, just as much as the landscape, want to be adaptable, they want to be flexible, they want to be multi-use. They're not static buildings, but they're places where people can hang out on a regular basis, places where markets can begin to pop up, and other kinds of events can use them. There may be more, there may be less, but at this point, there's sort of 4 key structures that might find themselves in the park. I just want to spend a quick moment to discuss each one. The first one is this pavilion, which again is not a performance pavilion. It's a space that is flexible, that has multiple kinds of orientations, and that can scale to different types of activities, so that it will have the capacity and the infrastructure to house very large events, ballet performances, small group performances, even spoken word. But it's also, again, a place where a group of even this size could meet on the stage and hold a meeting like this right there in park, providing that the weather is a little bit warmer than it is outside right now. But it's also an opportunity, this pavilion, to, again, add to the iconic quality of the park. So these are not generic buildings. These are not generic structures. These are purpose-built, a custom design for this park in this city. There's also this opportunity for a cafe and a restaurant, which again is an idea about how do we take advantage of the fact that this exists in a park with park all around it, that you go to the park to have a meal, right? You don't go to a restaurant and then to a park afterwards, but you actually go to the park to have a meal, and that this cafe restaurant has these transparencies and canopy extensions that really bring that dining experience right into the park. Or even when you're inside dining, you have big windows that bring that quality of the park right into the space. or spaces like this, which is sort of half outdoors, half indoors, very hard to define if you're in a building or in the park, but you're having this meal. There's an idea about a cafe or a bark bar, which is associated with a dog park or sort of a more casual experience that you arrive to with friends that has sort of a pop-up quality to it. There's different spaces for different kinds of dining, for small groups, for friends, for larger groups. And then when we talk about restrooms and facilities, again, sort of the necessary components to make a park work and function, not only we're not talking about sort of drag and drop cinder block pavilions, but we don't just want to build a restroom facility. We want to build a place where you can find some shelter, you can find some shade. There's a visitor center that's associated with it. The restrooms are part of a structure, but it's not sort of the primary purpose of any of these kinds of structures. So you might see buildings or facilities that look like this that extend their space again out into the park, or that have canopies or sort of areas for gathering associated with them. But in the end, that are just as beautiful as the pavilion, right? That there's not a kind of a hierarchy of that's going to be a beautiful building, that's going to be a beautiful building. The idea is that all of these buildings themselves have a kind of a beauty to them and have a quality of an experience that mirrors the incredible qualities of the park. Maybe give that to Simon. Or to Cody, yeah.
So, how does this all come together, you ask? This is kind of the point where we're going to break off in a minute, but I kind of want to set the stage for what we're really going to talk about and what we're going to kind of dig into in the smaller groups. We talked a lot through all of this discussion about these kind of 4 core park spaces, through what we've heard from you and the public feedback, from what we've seen be successful in other places. We think these are kind of crucial to the success of the park. So it's the pavilion, which Jeffrey talked a lot about. It's the Great Lawn. It's the flexible plaza and restaurant, these kind of combination, and the stormwater, which is actually something that we need to do in terms of the way that the site needs to be engineered, but it's also something that we think is going to become a feature. So there's 4 critical elements to the park. With those 4 elements, we talked about, back to Caroline, about the mapping exercises that we did together. So what we did is we kind of pushed these pieces around onto the site to determine what's the best spot, what's the best place for a restaurant, what's the best place for a lawn, what's the best place for stormwater, what's the best place for a pavilion. So we kind of started to create these heat maps, and from that we've determined that these are kind of the 4 general, it's still general, you see that there's circles that are touching and overlapping. They're not specific, but they're kind of general locations of where we think these 4 core elements go. The flexible plaza and restaurant we think is a no-brainer to happen off of Academy Street. With its connection to all of the energy, all of the things that are happening on Academy, it just makes a lot of sense. The Great Lawn, we think there's a lot of topography, so there's a lot of actual kind of elevation change from top to bottom. So we think the Great Lawn being an extension of Phase 1, as well as taking advantage of the slope, makes a lot of sense. The pavilion anchors the Great Lawn, so that becomes kind of part of the heart of the park, right? It becomes a place where you have events. It sets up really nicely for performances, for all kinds of activities that face the lawn. And then on the low side of the site is stormwater. So again, we think that logically, from you, from us, from the town, these kind of pieces don't really move in the concepts that we're going to talk about. We think the integration of Town Square is critically important. So we're showing some images as we start to, as a team, kind of conceptualize visually, what is the feeling, what is the mood, how does this look on the day-to-day, what kind of space are we talking about, the kind of quality of space. As you can see, this is the fountain in the background of Phase 1, and starting to think visually about the connection from Phase 1 to a lawn space, to a great lawn that moves down the hill and a pavilion in the background. So we're starting to think visually about these spaces. The flexible plaza, this can be something that does a heck of a lot for us, right? This can be a platform for farmers markets, for performances, just for the day-to-day to spend a few hours and in the shade. There's going to be shade. And potentially some water features. And you can see that in this plaza, we're also thinking that there's a lot of opportunity for food and beverage. You'll hear us say a lot that there's no better way to activate public space than with food and beverage. So we think that this is a good place for that. This is another shot of the plaza. Imagine having tents set up in the plaza. We've heard a lot about a farmer's market. We've heard a lot about different types of pop-up markets. This could be a place that could support some of those different activities. The stormwater and pavilion. So we're starting to think about what does it feel like on the lower part of the site as the stormwater moves in. What do the plant communities look like? What are the big trees that we have on site? Those are amazing assets that we want to take full advantage of. How do those play a role in the kind of quality of space in the park? So concept one, this is really kind of I'm not going to spend too much time here because it's easier to understand and comprehend and digest as we're in small groups together. So we're going to talk about it together. But essentially, in general, concept one is more about a distributed and evenly distributed program. So we're thinking about not overloading program too much in one part of the park. It's really about kind of an even distribution. In this, you can see the kind of grayed out flexible plaza, great lawn, pavilion, stormwater underneath. Those are core. Those don't move. Those are the 4 that we talked about. But in this, we see the children's garden plays a major role. That's kind of connected to the library. Makes a lot of sense. There's some synergies there with programming that the library can be involved in. There's a real connection there. We can see some active entertainment happening on the east side along Walker, and then the dog play area, a small food and beverage outpost. We talked about the Bark Bar kind of happening on Park Street. So again, kind of an even distribution of program.
Cody, I think maybe we should clarify by active entertainment. Active entertainment, that's a lot of stuff Simon was talking about in terms of the play that's not necessarily for children,
Right.
for everyone from teenagers on up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the children's play. So what does that start to look like? Again, this is not necessarily a hardline representation of the final design of the park, but we wanted to kind of give you a sense of the space that we're talking about. So in this image, you can see the library on the left side of the image, and that the children's garden really, in this position, in this concept, in this idea, interacts very nicely. You can see that there could be a bridge over, that it takes advantage of some of the elevation change here. Again, this is really just starting to kind of think about the quality of space and start to think about how these different programs interact with one another. So, again, we want to hear from you. Do you like this relationship between the library and the kids' garden? Does that make sense? Or do we like it somewhere else? The Bark Bar, this is, in this scenario, is on Park. So imagine having a kind of a dual-purpose food and beverage outpost that could serve, if you don't even have a dog, you could come here. That would be great to spend an afternoon here and watch dogs play. But it's also could serve as a place for people to come kind of meet and socially recreate. And this could happen on Park Street, or in other scenarios, it could happen elsewhere in the park. Concept 2, again, visually it kind of looks similar, but I think as we start to talk as a group, you start to understand the differences. But essentially what we're doing is this concept focuses more energy around the water. So it doesn't necessarily pull energy from elsewhere, but it just focuses energy and focuses programming around the water. We love the idea of the stormwater. We love the idea of making that an integral part of the park and the success of the park. So this idea says, what if we put a restaurant, a pavilion, a deck right on the stormwater feature? How do we interact with that? Can we have bridges that go across? Are there educational opportunities? I also want to point out that these concepts, these ideas, are not mutually exclusive. So if we like things, and you'll see in the final, if you like things from each one, we can kind of pick and choose what we like, and we can get that feedback from you. That's the kind of thing that we want to talk about today. So imagine the island. We're just calling this an island. There's some opportunities on the low point of the site because there's some amazing legacy trees. So we want to save those trees. We don't want to disturb them. So there may be some opportunities to create islands under the trees that you could get to via bridge. So there's some really interesting ideas in the way that we can engage the trees, engage the water, and kind of take advantage of this low point of the site. The integrated stormwater feature, imagine a pavilion that sits, again, on the low point of the site as this kind of iconic anchoring point with the grand lawn on one side, the water feature on the other. This just becomes another part of the park that feels very quiet, but it's engaging. You can imagine having boat races. You can imagine having different types of educational opportunities. And again, just a beautiful feature that is not only serving very programmatic functions, but it's also serving a very real, sustainable function for stormwater capture. The third concept, what we're doing here, we are pushing energy to Park and Walker. We think that the future and the way that development is going to continue to happen, we think that making the connection on Walker and looking to making a loop from Chatham down Academy to Walker back to Chatham, that could make some sense. So does it make sense to focus more energy on the corner of Park and Walker? So basically in this concept, what we're saying is let's have this kind of, what if we had an amazing adventure play area that had food and beverage outposts, that had water features, that had tree houses, that took advantage, again, of some of the amazing trees on the site, had places for teens, had places for kids, had places for dogs, thinking about, pushing some of the energy to the corner of Park and Walker. Again, these things are not mutually exclusive, so we can kind of pick and choose the ideas that we like. Again, this is just a conceptualization of what does a food and beverage outpost look like on that corner. It could just be a casual place to go in the afternoon or in the evening, have a glass of wine, go to an event. Could really become a nice amenity in the park. So here are the three concepts together. We have boards up here that we're going to talk more about in depth. I think it's going to take a little study and a little discussion. And then we're going to pose some questions to you, because again, ultimately, this is about feedback. This is about you. This is about what you want for your park. And so I'm just going to kind of quickly go through the questions to set the stage, and then we're going to kind of release everybody to go and start talking about the boards. We're going to ask a series of questions that relate essentially directly to the positioning of the program. So these are questions that say, which alternative provides the best location for food and beverage? Pretty straightforward. So let's talk about that. And then we're going to give everybody the opportunity to vote and think about which concept does that best, right? We're going to, again, which concept proposes the best location of the dog park? Let's talk about that. Let's see where we think everyone thinks the dog park should go. Best location for kids. Is it better to have it against the library? Does that make sense? Or, again, in concept 3, we're thinking about potentially pushing it to the corner of Park and Walker. What does everybody think about that? Let's get some feedback. Which alternative provides the best locations for interactive water? And again, this is not mutually exclusive. We can have, I think we believe in the beauty and the power of water, so we think that this can happen in a lot of different places. So let's talk about that. Which alternative provides the best location for Urban Beach? I told you we'd come back to this, because Urban Beach is kind of an interesting concept for everyone. I think that this is really just a flexible space. This is something where you could take your kids to build sandcastles. You could sit with a towel and under an umbrella and just spend an afternoon and read a book. It's just another flexible space that can be used for a lot of different ways. Then which concept proposes the best overall organization? So again, pretty straightforward.
And these 6 questions are the reason you have those orange little dots that you were handed when you walk in.
More dots.
But, and so you'll have a chance to vote very simply on which scheme you prefer. But by all means, we have sticky notes up there as well. If you have different thoughts or different concepts to where something might belong,
Let's hear it.
please go ahead and use that and place it on the board.
I don't think we have 6,000 dots this time.
No.
But we have quite a few. And lastly, we have some open-ended questions, which I think are really fun. This is where we're hoping to get some more, some kind of creative feedback from you. Again, this is one step in the process. We're going to meet a lot more together, and we're going to talk more about these things. But let's start thinking about what are some of the aspects of Cary's history that can be incorporated into the park, whether it be in the kids' garden, whether it be in the plazas, whether it be in the play areas. What are some things that we're not thinking about that you think would be amazing to integrate into the park, right? So this is open-ended. We want to hear your thoughts. What proposed features shown today would make the downtown park unique? Again, open. And if you think we're missing something, let's hear that. We want to hear from you. Ultimately, today is about you. It's about your feedback. And with that, I think we're going to adjourn and go have some discussion. So, so again, I think we have